By 1850, the various German states had still not been brought together in any sort of meaningful confederation. And even if they had been cobbled together somehow, the question is who would be dominant? Would it be Austria or would it be Prussia? See, both were jockeying for position in that regard. By the end of 1850, it looked like Austria had won. Prussia had been made to sign a humiliating treaty, joining a German confederation led by and dominated by Austria. And to add insult to injury, the Hohenzollern regime had been forced to produce a constitution, Prussia's first written constitution, which was a bow to the liberals. And to rub salt in the wound, throughout the 1850s, Prussia had been more or less marginalized by the other great powers in Europe in conflict after conflict. In 1861, Prussia's king, Friedrich Wilhelm IV, died, and he was succeeded by his younger brother, Wilhelm I, who was crowned King of Prussia. Wilhelm appointed the brusque but seasoned 6'5" Count Otto von Bismarck as his new minister-president. So Otto von Bismarck is now effectively running the Prussian government. And this is significant because Bismarck had a dream. His dream was to restore and dramatically increase Prussian power in Europe, particularly the power of Prussia's ruling Junker class, to which he belonged. Now, how was he going to do this? By creating a new German unification led by Prussia and excluding Austria. The only way to build such a confederation would be not through liberal reforms or parliaments or elections or speeches. No, as he famously told the German parliament in 1862, it would be through iron and blood. But how would he convert those provocative words into real-world results? Well, first he had to make sure that the Prussian military was well funded, even if he had to go around the German parliament to get the money, which he did. And as a result, the Prussian military was very well equipped with the latest and greatest in terms of arms and armament, and also vastly increased in size. So now he needed a war, and that war started right here in the provinces of Schleswig and Holstein. Mostly German in terms of population, but controlled at the time by Denmark. Control that Denmark had successfully defended against Prussia by force of arms just a decade earlier. It had been quite humiliating for Prussia. This is where Bismarck's first war would begin. And the opportunity came when the Danish king died without a direct male successor. Instead, a guy named Christian IX from a junior royal line was crowned king of Denmark. So Bismarck used this opportunity to contest Christian's claim to Schleswig and Holstein. Christian IX responded by tightening his grip on Schleswig. Bismarck couldn't have been happier, though. This is exactly what he wanted. And he used the situation, the crisis, to rile up the various German states, including Austria, with his nationalistic fervor. This was a war of liberation, liberating the German peoples of Holstein and Schleswig from foreign rule. Bismarck had Saxony and Hanover occupy Holstein, while the Prussians and the Austrians together battled their way into Schleswig and eventually ended up occupying Denmark itself. The Prussians proved their mettle on the battlefield, armed with the newest and the best of military hardware, particularly their breech-loading rifles. When the dust settled and the Treaty of Vienna had been signed, Prussia walked away with Schleswig and Austria with Holstein. But this was only the first step in Bismarck's scheme. He'd positioned Prussia as sort of the leader, leading the way when it came to German nationalism. Now he needed to exclude Austria. He needed to make sure that Austria, stayed out of German politics as completely as possible. So he needed to bait Austria into a fight. And so when Austria complained about Prussian administration over the newly won territories of Schleswig and Holstein, Bismarck responded by invading Holstein. Both sides now geared up for war. Most of the German states, by the way, sided with Austria here. A few northern states joined Prussia, as did Italy. Italy hoping to gain Venetia from the Habsburgs, from Austria, and thereby move that much closer to complete Italian unification. Almost from the get-go, and surprising many European observers, The Prussians dominated the Austrians throughout this war. Now, the Prussians had several advantages, and we've talked about one of them, their military hardware, particularly those breech-loading rifles. And it took the Austrians 4 times as long to load their old muzzle loaders. But the Prussians also had the advantage of mobility. Prussia had been building railroad after railroad, so troops could be moved very, very quickly. At the critical Battle of Sadova, the Austrians and Austria's allies lost 5 times as many men as the Prussians. After that, it was game over. Just like that, Prussia was the undisputed leader of the German states of Europe, not Austria. The old Habsburg-led German Confederation was dissolved, and a new Hohenzollern-led North German Confederation replaced it in the mostly Protestant North. German nationalists now placed their hopes for a unified Germany in this Prussia-dominated confederation, particularly now that it excluded multi-ethnic Austria. That always bugged some people. Speaking of Austria, its one-time allies in the 7 Weeks' War were annexed by Prussia. Prussia officially absorbed Schleswig and Holstein into its own territory. Other states were forced to join the Confederation as well. Prussia was now master of Central Europe. But Bismarck wasn't done. He still needed at least one more war. Now that Bismarck had united the various northern German states under Prussian rule, he needed a way to rope in the southern German states and create a real unified Germany, of course excluding Austria. How do you do this? Well, you create a common enemy, and that common enemy turned out to be France. There was a Spanish succession crisis, and a Hohenzollern prince was pegged as potential heir to the Spanish throne. Of course, the French government did not relish the prospect of 2 Hohenzollerns, allied Hohenzollerns, basically surrounding France, and so tried to get Wilhelm to promise that not only would this Hohenzollern prince not take the Spanish throne, but no Hohenzollern would ever sit on the Spanish throne. Now, Wilhelm politely refused to make such a promise, but the exchange between him and an ambassador, the account, was edited by Bismarck to make it seem like the conversation had been much more inflammatory, much more insulting to both sides, and then this was released to the press. Bismarck later described his action as waving a red cape in front of a bull. So you gotta be careful. What you hear on the news, particularly in the run-up to war, may not be accurate. Well, waving the red cape worked. France declared war. Bismarck and Wilhelm riled up the Germans and their princes using, heady nationalist rhetoric. The southern German states did indeed jump on board, and a unified Germany now stared down the Second Empire of France. The Germans overwhelmed the French again and again and again until the great showdown at the French town of Sedan. Here, the fate of Germany and France for the next several decades would be decided. It turned out to be a bloodbath for France, for both sides really, but the French lost twice as many as the Germans. And when the smoke cleared, not only had 100,000 French soldiers been captured by the Prussians and their German allies, but also Napoleon III himself, the French emperor. And with that, the Second Empire of France collapsed. The fighting went on for 5 long, bloody months after Sedan, but eventually German troops were able to march triumphantly through Paris, victors in the Franco-Prussian War. Now, as Germans back home celebrated this great victory, the Prussian king, Wilhelm I, was being crowned at Versailles. This is another poke in the eye of the French. He's being crowned at Versailles itself, Emperor, Kaiser, Caesar of a new German empire, later recognized as the Second Reich, the first being the Holy Roman Empire. The Second Reich, a new German empire. The southern German states joined as well. Only tiny Liechtenstein and tiny Luxembourg refrained. Germany slapped France with harsh reparations and took Alsace-Lorraine. And thus the process was complete. Bismarck, through iron and lots of blood, really total war. This was the introduction of modern total war. The German wars of unification combined with the American Civil War, so-called, sort of introduced modern total war, which would be demonstrated in full force during World War I and World War II a few decades later. But Bismarck, using total war and combining it with deft political maneuvering, some genius diplomacy, the harnessing of nationalism, of course, integral to total war, modern total war, and manipulation of the press, all these came together in order to unify Germany, dominated by Prussia. And this new state was autocratic and very, very powerful, poised to change world history.